Okay, so good morning. My name is Shauna Stefanchik, and today I wanted to just share some information with you about how you might go about pacing your priority standards in the core contents. So I always start my presentations. I'm going to keep it off presentation mode because I'm going to bounce back and forth to the internet, and that's just easier for me than rather to stop sharing. But this is just my introduction page and my picture of why I'm still not in the school system because I had 5 kids in 3.5 years. But a little bit about my history. I'm from a small town. I spent most of my time in rural, and now I spent some time working as a district coach. So I was in the district office when Common Core came and then went for a bit, and was a principal, worked with the RPDC in the state as a PLC consultant, an ELA trainer, and now I work for myself independently. Um, and so today, what I wanted to do is talk to you about with the new priority standards, recommended standards through the State Department. I wanted to share some ideas of how you might pace those priority standards throughout the core contents. So I've tried to whittle it down to 5 steps. So some things we could remember. So here are the 5 steps that I'm going to go over today. At one, we really need to make sure that we honor teachers having time to understand the priority standards and have that reconciliation moment of if we had priority standards in the past, how do we compare those against what's coming new now? If you didn't have priority standards in the past, then this is a great opportunity to just introduce teachers to that concept. Two is you're going to review your resources and current pacing. This step is going to talk about really honoring the past work that teachers have done. You're going to consider the learning progressions and cognitive demands in the content. You're going to determine a pacing template that really clearly delineates priority standards for teachers. And step 5 is really promoting collaboration and ownership of the curriculum from all stakeholders. Even though not all teachers can be involved in the process of curriculum writing because it's so big and you can only have a few people, I do want to suggest some ideas to help everyone have ownership of the curriculum, because when we have ownership, then we might be invested in teaching it. So the first step here in understanding the priority standards, and this is why I wanted to have my screen off presentation mode. This is just a screenshot from the DESE website, but sometimes finding things on the DESE website is its own game. So I wanted to go ahead and hop over and just show everyone how you would get there. This is also helpful to do for teachers. I always like to take time and really show them how to navigate the website. So once you go there, if you go to educators and then scroll over to curriculum, once you do that, and my computer is going to be a little slow today, let's see if it's going to work. And we will, there we go. It's just very, very slow. So typically we go here because you can look on the right, and this is where how you can easily jot to any contents specific curriculum page. But most all the DESE pages have a quick links box, and you can see the very first one at the quick links is priority standards. I do want to highlight one other thing. If you scroll down on this curriculum page, they do have content meetings. And so this is a way, if you're someone who has not attended these content meetings, the content meetings won't start until July. They are having office hours. So, I'm kind of sourcing as an outside consultant, giving you some advice on DESE. But if you wanted to talk directly to a coordinator, this has their office hours, and you can double click on those and sign up. All the coordinators are amazing. I know all of them well. And so I would suggest doing that. But also throughout the year, these content meetings are a great opportunity to learn more information, although I attend those and I'll update you on my website as well. But wanted to make sure you knew about that. So back up to the quick links box. If you click on priority standards, that will bring up for you the priority standard page, and you'll see this graphic that I had on my slide. A couple of different things. They have added some additional resources underneath here. There's also, you can see under each content, they're starting to add more and more supporting materials. I won't have time to go into all of those today, but I wanted to highlight them to make sure you might, as you're doing curriculum work, want to give some time to look through that and give teachers to look through some of those supporting materials. I tend to dive really deeply into ELA and social studies. And so I'm not as familiar with the math and science. So wanted to point that out. So anyway, that is the page where you will find your priority standards in the supporting documents. And so the first thing I would just suggest is making sure that you print those out for teachers and have those ready. Now I'm going to go through each content and give you a little bit of a synopsis of my understanding of them at a high level. So ELA priority standards, I was on the work teams for those, and one of the things that is really nice is that they do build vertically K-8 and 6-8. So, oops, you know what? I want to change that to K-5, 6-8, and I need to change that to 6-12. So you'll really notice K-5 that the standards do build. And so you don't have to worry about those vertical gaps between grade levels of maybe we covered this here, but we didn't cover it somewhere else. I think ELA did a really nice job of looking at that. That being said, 6 through 12, they are the same priority standards that have been prioritized 6 through 12. So they're just going deeper and deeper. That could lead to some holes. So that's something to think about if it was something that wasn't a priority standard. You know, keeping in mind that even though these are prioritized, it doesn't mean we don't teach the other ones. We just want to make sure we assess those. But there could be a little bit of a gap between 5 and 6. So I wanted to make sure that you're aware and might be looking at that. In addition, I feel like there are a few standards that you might want to add as a district. And here's an example, because I'm an ELA person. You know, they went through 3 or 4 revisions and work groups, and so it's not a perfect document, right? They said they are recommended. So districts still want to go in and look at them. Kindergarten beginning, middle, and end was not chosen as a priority standard. It was at one point, then was dropped. In the final document, it's not. I personally would suggest as a district person that beginning, middle, and end should be a priority standard at kindergarten, because that leads to finding beginning, middle, and end so you can summarize in a story later, so that you can find information. That is a very, in my opinion, critical component for larger skills of drawing conclusions and finding evidence in a text and summarizing. So that would be an example, and why I would say, hey, there in some points there might be some additional priority standards. And for my districts, I've identified those and said, hey, make sure. And there's just 3 or 4 that I would say, or 2 or 3 really at each grade level that might need to be added. They do focus on a lot at the K-2 reading foundation standards. So that might be overwhelming to teachers because they're not as prioritized, but they are foundational skills. So, but one thing I would say is, and that I've done for my districts, is I've pulled out the reading foundation standards and made that a separate document for teachers, because they typically, teach foundations in a different block. And then I would also suggest, as you're looking at your priority standards, a nice way I have found to separate them is putting the comprehension and speaking listening priority standards together, and then the language and writing. And I'll show you some examples of how I've done that. But really, I'm just trying to help make connections for teachers among the standards, but yet not have such a huge, robust document that it's hard for them to see those. But that's an overview of ELA. They're pretty much built vertically. There's a few that you might want to add into the recommended or give teachers time to think about. Math priority standards, I would definitely allow teachers some time to review some priority standards shifts. And I'm going to give you an example of an activity right after this that I've done that has worked well. Specifically, they might need to shorten some units or add more units. And I put an example I found doing this work, that data analysis, there's a bigger emphasis on that now for 5th grade. And that was one of the things that we've noticed. So teachers are going to need time. Fractions are still big in 4th grade. Some things will stay the same. But some teachers noticed 2nd grade, money is hit really hard. It doesn't really show up in K and 1. That's a great conversation for teachers to have. K1, it doesn't show up as a priority standard, but you know what, as a district, we're going to go ahead and recommend that at least at kindergarten, they identify and know the values of coins. And in 1st grade, they really need to start counting them, because in 2nd grade, they have to master mixed coins and dollars. So I'm just trying to give you some examples of the vertical conversations that need to happen and the shifts. So here's an example of what I've done with districts. You've got to love our big chart paper, but really you can choose a content at a time give them the recommended priority standards, and just give them some time to think about what they have prioritized in the past and what shifts do they notice. So this is where that example of second grade said, hey, money is a really big thing here for us. Fourth grade is fractions. Fifth grade said, hey, data analysis is now big. But they write the big concepts and let each grade level do that. K through 12, it usually works well to do K5 and 612. But have them write them up and do a vertical gallery walk and just take notes. What do we notice? It's a really great thing for teachers to have that vertical articulation, and it really helps consolidate in people's minds a few shifts that are happening, and you get buy-in from other teachers of, well, we'd love to get rid of money, but man, second grade really needs us, so we can add some things to our chart paper. Just really great foundational conversations to have prior to getting to your pacing guides. Social studies, the biggest thing to understand about the recommended priority standards here, and I've taken a screenshot and put a little arrow. They are not prioritizing content in social studies. They have prioritized their social studies tools of inquiry. So there are things like describe and analyze a primary and secondary source, select and use artifacts to share information on a social studies topic. These priority standards are getting away from students memorizing content, and they're wanting them to focus on using the tools of inquiry to read a passage and come up with the content, or to know how to find the information. This is a huge shift for social studies. So when we get to content and pacing, I'll give suggestions on how teachers can use the content pacing that they've already decided. And this is probably for older grades who are really into teaching social studies, especially 612, can honor the content they've already had, but they're really going to need to figure out how they are infusing these tools of inquiry in multiple units over time. So that's the big thing with priority social studies. They're tools of inquiry, not content. And look, I'm not following my lesson plan, so I've already just shared some of those suggestions. And the science priority standards, they had already done a lot of work and with the NGSS standards and felt they were already pared down. So if you look at science, and I already had it up here, their document looks different than everybody else's priority standards. Again, they had already done some work, and here's an example of their template. They have them by unit. So for example, this is motion and stability, forces, interactions. It's got the priority standard, but then they have their science and engineering practices, the core ideas. And what I love as a ELA person is they've got these cross-cutting concepts. So they're really explicitly showing teachers here how it cross-cuts with math and ELA. And if you scroll down to the document, they've even correlated it with your ELA standards, which can be very helpful for your 4th and 5th grade teachers. And older grades, we're really trying to see how they incorporate other contents. So those have already been pared down, but again, in more of a unique template that really delineate these different practices, and it's very well scripted and provides more information. So some discrepancy in how the priority standards documents look. But again, the biggest point with number 1 is helping teachers understand the priority standards. I know we do everything electronically, and I would have them saved in a folder for teachers, but giving them hard copies of these and giving them some time to just think about them and make notes. What do they notice? Are there any shifts? Really help concrete some of these new ideas for them. Number 2, once you've had time to review the priority standards and understand the purpose behind them and how they're organized and the shifts from how you thought about the content in the past, you can begin to review your current resources and pacing. Now, this can be counterintuitive of textbook curriculum, right? That you're going to want to honor those cognitive demands and do your priority standard pacing there. But I would recommend to you, if you're a district who spent a lot of money on a resource, or your teachers are used to using a specific resource, I would honor the pacing of that resource, because it just makes it a lot more complicated if you tell teachers, okay, we'll teach these concepts out of unit 3, then skip over here to unit 2. Because the textbook company wrote that to have the cognitive demand to build upon units. So when you pull different units out, it can get really tricky and hard for teachers. So that's where the suggestion from number 2 comes from, is really try to honor the current pacing. And I'm going to show you an example And then you've already noticed in previous activities some shifts. So then you might have conversations of, are there any units we need to extend, or is there anything we need to add? For instance, Eureka Math, some of the districts I work with use that, and it doesn't have a huge unit on data analysis and interpretation. So a district might say, gosh, now there's a big shift to that. We're going to add a unit or add additional lessons that weren't there. We can still keep the pacing, but we're going to extend the window of when we teach that unit. And also this last bullet, consider how you can bring clarity to Missouri standards. One of the hardest things with using other resources is no resource wrote it so that students could score well in Missouri. You know, they're pedagogically sound of how to teach kids how to do math or do reading, but now how to do well on the Missouri test and the Missouri standards. So there's a shift sometimes in how those standards are taught. So you really want to make sure teachers understand what their standards are, because they might need to shift how it is asked in their series. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Here's an example of how you might want to paste to a current resource. So I recently worked with a district who had Lucy Calkins. So I'm going to say, okay, look at your Lucy Calkins Missouri alignment. So here it is in session 1. Here are the Missouri learning standards that take place. Then I would have them highlight which ones of these are priority standards. Because what I'm wanting them to do is see, are all of the priority standards covered within it? Because if they're not, we got to figure out where to put them in. But to figure out, where does Lucy teach our Missouri priority standards? So then you know within her lessons which ones to really hone in and go deeply. And so then what they could do is, when looking at their priority standard document, they could list, okay, this priority standard R1A is covered in unit 1.5, 1.7, 3.2. So we can see it's a lot heavy in unit 1 and only touched in a little bit in 3. Then I can ask as a teacher, well, if they're going to see that on the MAP test for older grades, maybe I do need to add that in some later units. Or I can decide, you know what, it's covered heavy enough. This cross correlation of seeing where they're already taught and making sure, is every one of our priority standards covered in our current resource, is really helpful for teachers to do. And once they've done that work and they've reconciled, here's the resources we have to teach, where the priorities start. If you don't have a resource that's kind of already considered the learning progressions and cognitive demands, and you just have the priority standards, then I would skip step 2 and come to step 3. If you had step 2 and you have a resource, then I would hope that your resource would have done step 3, so you could skip this one. But you really need to think about the learning progressions. So here's an example of that. Teaching main idea and details is very important and a hard skill for kids, much like identifying the theme. Well, what we found cognitively, it's usually easier in nonfiction text to recognize where the main idea and details are, because they have text features that support it, titles, subheadings. So I have seen in some districts pacing that they teach fiction, identifying the theme and supporting details, before nonfiction. I would say to flip that, because knowing the cognitive demands of kids, it's going to be easier for them in a nonfiction text. So I would have that unit and those priority standards come first. So that's just an example of what I mean of thinking about the cognitive demand. Math, it's a bit easier. I don't want to jump to multiplication if we don't have a solid understanding of addition and arrays, right? So ELA is a little bit trickier to do with the cognitive demand than some of the other subjects. But if you don't have a textbook or a resource you're using, these conversations definitely need to happen. Something that can help you with that is anchoring your teachers in state documents, like the item specifications or the MOLEAPs. And again, consider doing this work in K5 and 6-8 so that they can, or 6-12, I need to change that, so that they could have those cross-grade conversations and determine, support each other for one and see where everybody's going, but determine if there are any things that are left out, and talk about the differences in interpretation of units and cognitive demand. It's great PD. Teachers have a lot of cognitive dissonance doing it, but it's great learning. So once you have decided the pacing, that you've covered all the priority standards within your resource, really what you need to do is have some type of template that helps teachers clearly see where are my priority standards, what's my unit, what are my priority standards, oops, I'm moving that around, and then as we go down, then what are my supporting standards within that unit. It's important to me that teachers have clarity on, in Unit 1, what are my priority standards, because what this leads to is this is what we're going to be assessing within this unit. So if you're teaching Lucy Calkins, which would probably take you a, more than a year if you did the whole thing, right? All textbooks jam a ton of stuff in there, more than teachers could ever teach. So we really want to have a document in place that helps them know, hey, this is what's really important that kids master and do. So this is what your assessment's going to be around. Pick out the lessons around this standard in your base. So if you have to leave something out of your resource, just don't leave this out, if that makes sense. So this is a template I use, NCEL, for districts that I work with, that is just really nice, and they can hyperlink things into it. It's a one-stop shop curriculum, so they don't have a million folders, but it clearly tells them what's the student ICANN language, what's their priority standard, and what are the other supporting things that I need to make sure I touch on. So this is our guaranteed Missouri curriculum that we can make sure we have in place. And here's just a screenshot of how they would have, here's my unit that's correlated to my resource if I had one. Here's my ICANN statements that are aligned to the priority standards. And here are the supporting, speaking and listening and other things. So they're just really clear on the Missouri standards that they're teaching in that unit. Here's an example of what it might look like for social studies that's not yet filled out, but you could change the headings. Maybe you don't want the ICANN language, you just want the priority. I might even change supporting standards to content standards, because in social studies, they're going to be, those priorities are their tools of inquiry, so they could easily see which tools of inquiry am I hitting in this civilization unit. And then they could put other important links or units in there. So just some examples of what those templates might look like, but teachers just need a quick document where they can easily pull out what are the priorities here. And 5, when promoting collaboration and ownership of curriculum, just consider when you're doing summer work how you can promote collaboration, like that chart paper example I showed, using protocols to really have conversation and giving people think time. And then another thing that I work with my districts is shifting your PLCs to be curriculum focused. So in order to get ownership, we usually have a small team doing the work, and then everybody else, oh, I didn't do this. This isn't my thing. Well, let's get those curriculum documents part of the PLC process. Let's bring in front of everybody the scope and sequence, and let's talk about, okay, what is our assessment going to look like? Are there things we need to shift? Having a feedback loop, but really making it part of the daily PLC routine for teams so that they're familiar with their curriculum and they have voice. And then at any time that you can, encourage and provide opportunities for vertical collaboration for teachers. And I'm going to end with, here's just kind of my curriculum checklists, right? That you're going to look at DESE priority standards, you're going to paste those. So that's really what we talked about today. But the next steps, and I'll be having some webinars over those, are you're going to want to make sure that you have really high quality state aligned assessments for each one of those priority standards. And then you're going to want to look at grade card alignment too. So it's a good time just to shape everything up and get it aligned. And these types of documents really help. These ICANN can basically turn right into your grade card. So there's real clarity for teachers, for parents, and for students. So in review, make sure teachers, you're giving them time to understand their priority standards, and having that cognitive dissonance to review the current resources you have and the pacing, and if able, honor that pacing with the new standards. If you don't have a resource, then you're going to need to have time for them to talk about learning progressions. You're going to need to think about a template, a way that you're going to really lay out your district curriculum, Missouri curriculum, and then you're going to always want to consider how you can promote collaboration and ownership of that curriculum. So with that, I am going to stop the video and I'll take questions on the call. Thank you.